So this is questions for the group. You have 2 mics. This is not a race. If you want to answer one, you can answer one. To our newest one, how did you prepare for CWNE?
First of all the exams. I choose during my exams the blog posts for references, and also since you need to have a publication, so I use the blogs also for my publication. And for the essays itself, I use like real life experience that I captured over the years that I was working as a wireless engineer in the field.
Did you have a mentor help you prepare for the application?
Not per se a mentor, but one of my endorsers read through my things and gave some feedback.
Okay, we have at least 2. Are you on the board?
Am I? No.
No. So we have 2 board members here. You can take your turns and answer the question. What would you like to see in the CWNE application? So you have, just a couple minutes to explain what's the best way to turn in your application.
Sure. So I think I'll say the disclaimer first for Martin and I, that because we are board members, nothing that we are saying here represents the words of CWP program and what they have as their requirements. And these are our opinions. My personal opinion is that I look at the application as potentially the first chance that I get to see who you are and what your abilities are. So you obviously want to put your best foot forward on that first go around, because if you don't put your best foot forward, you're going to have to wait 6 months if you get the X instead of the check on it. So when you're going through and you're looking at your application, think about the brevity of it and think about how the person is going to read it. If you send things over as 10 little files, Word docs of this is this and this is this, it might not read how you want the person on the board to read your application. It's just like doing a report template, and people sit in my deep dive heard me say this, is tell the story that you want to tell and let the reader come to the conclusion that you want them to come to the conclusion. Don't let them make assumptions. So for me, I prefer to see everything in one single PDF that has a flow to it, so that I can learn through you the story that you want me to tell, or what you're trying to tell, and I interpret it correctly. I'm not, okay, was it this way? Was it that way? How did things flow? How did things go through? And to be honest, if you send things over as a single PDF as a reviewer, it is extremely easy for me to review. And because this is a volunteer position and many of us are trying to fit this in through our other busy schedules in our life, it enables us to read it more quickly and be able to hopefully get an answer back to Tom and the rest of the board quicker rather than slowly. So my personal preference is prepare that as a single PDF and tell that story how you want us to read it, so that we get that best image that we can of you, and there's no questions, no possible ways that we could look at it and interpret it differently.
Martin?
I have a couple of thoughts about reading lately on the documents. First of all, we have some essays which more than 50% of the text is not really about the project you're describing. It's more like other stuff going in, trying to teach someone. There are like reference to a little bit marketing and sales terms for products. That's not needed either. So keep your essays around the topic, and if you are talking about products or topology, include a picture of the topology so we don't have to guess how the whole setup was done. The second thing is that sometimes we got a welcome letter, which is also not required. You send in your CV, but we don't want to have, I don't like personally that people are describing, thank you for having me, or I have the chance to send in the letter. There's just several pages of me having to read extra stuff. So I like it to short and be concise, because we're spending like maybe between half and 1 hour for each application. And of course I have to do it, but let's say that it has to look professional. That's what Blake is saying. I don't mind spelling errors if you are from Portugal or from China, whatever, but you have to put in effort into it. Don't write it in the week before you're going to send it in. Start before your last exam. Collect your best experience and spend the last couple of months that you're preparing for the last exam to fill in your application. Then you can send it as soon as you get the results from the from the last exam. Because for me, sometimes it seems that people have been passed all the exams months or half year or 1 year ago and say, oh, I need to send that in before my exams time's out. And then it gets stressful, and then you're not probably preparing your best in your essays.
Okay, next question for all of you. Speed round. After the CWNE, what's the next exam people should take?
CWAP.
Like,
CWAP.
Same.
The new CWAP.
oh! Peter's like, yes, exactly. So, I'm making an assumption here for each of you. Describe your home lab.
Okay, well, I work for a vendor, so it's mainly vendor equipment, but before I worked for the vendor, it was any access point I could get hold of from any vendor. I worked for myself, but I invested in tools, which was, for me, when I worked for myself, the greatest thing I could have done. I used Ekahau. That was probably my biggest purchase. So any opportunity to use tools correctly in the right environment, I took. Spectrum analyzers, you absolutely have to have spectrum analyzers. Any work that you can do with Wireshark until you can afford proper frame capture software is good as well. Well, Wireshark is good, but obviously, yeah.
I think Jerome might have a problem with you saying that.
Yeah, again, the thing is there are a lot of tools out there, so you've got to work with the tools that you're within budget for you or the company that you work for, and that you're comfortable with, and that you've got the time to spend learning it. So pretty much anything that I could capture frames on. I remember when I first did my CWNE class, there was a free OmniPeak version that you could use, and that was great. That was a great tool. But one thing I do want to say about working in a lab is, especially if you spend a lot of time at home, the world kind of closes in around you. So for me, I always try to extend my experiences in the lab outside. So I would share what I was doing with people. So not only the equipment that I had in there, but also any contributions I could get from anybody else was a major part of it.
Well, I've personally been in Blake's basement, seen his lab. But how many times have you cycled through that set of gear?
Yeah, so being home office based, I haven't worked in a proper office in 12 years, give or take. I don't do good in cubes, they scare me. So I've had to have all the gear in my house. That's been part of the luxury of doing the podcast is, yes, I will admit that there are times that there's been some gear that has magically showed up at my doors, which has enabled me to have a wide variety of the access points hanging from my office ceiling that I now moved to the laundry room because I got tired of it all being above my head. But I think the big part about a lab is that a lab is only as good as you and what you do with that lab. Having all this gear is not saying I have a lab. It's running through scenarios, running through things, and actually learning how to use what it is. That's the biggest struggle for folks. So I encourage people to pick up things like, the CCIE workbooks from Fastlane, and when it used to be IP Expert, but now Jeff's done a great thing with the Network Dojo to be able to get some lab materials on there. INEs, all those people get their lab materials because it guides you through some actual activities that you can do in your lab. And you don't get hung up with just, okay, write a race. All right, I'm running through the configuration wizard. Sweet, I know how to do that. You've got to come up with some advanced scenarios that you can work through and do some of the troubleshooting with. And I can completely echo your statements on buying your gear and owning your gear. It's expensive, I understand it. But hey, you know what? You attend these conferences and you get little 50% off cards, or you get even freebies maybe. Capitalize on that. One of the best things I could have done for myself is I capitalize on the Savius. We got the OmniPeak 50% off for first-time attendees, and that was a great thing to do. Yes, I have to pay the maintenance every single year, but it reduced the initial purchase price down to where I was able to easily afford it. Buying your copy of Ekahau, it's tough to do, but having your own tools now means that you always have that tool at your disposal. And you're always doing that. I can't tell you how many times I've surveyed my house with Ekahau and a Sidekick. It's just, that's my lab that I have, and that keeps me up on being able to understand how these products work and how the technology works. You've got to be able to put the time in. And for us in wireless, I think it's more so than a lot of the other technologies. There's a lot of personal investments that we need to make if we truly, honestly want to understand how wireless works. So my lab, it's always changing, like he said, through different vendors. I've got Ubiquiti full stack as my house network now, but I've got Meraki full stack, Cisco full stack, Aruba almost full stack. I'm trying to squeeze a switch out of them because they're really expensive. But it's more important for me is, do you actually use that lab gear, and how do you actually use it, and what do you do on it?
Too many people have lab gear collections.
Yeah. I
look at all the things I have.
I've learned that having everything is not necessarily good. Have focused stuff, even if it's just, you're focusing on your vendor solution. That's great. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, because you still have taken the time to read some of the other vendors' solutions and see what they're doing. Yep. But I don't need to have every vendor under the sun in my house, because then when I have all this stuff, that's what happened with me. I had all these blinky lights on my ceiling, and it's just like, well, I can make a bag of popcorn in here, but I don't really know what the hell I'm doing with all the gear. So I took time to actually just shut down stuff and say, okay, I'm going to learn the Aruba ins and outs. I'm going to learn the Cisco ins and outs. I'm going to learn the Meraki ins and outs. Now I'm going to learn the Ubiquiti ins and outs. And I run those on my network, and you know what? I got to be honest. It's one of those things that when your kids can't watch Netflix, 5.9 has got nothing on that. If you got to make sure that the gear's up and running, put your kids on the network, and then you'll learn what uptime really means.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Family, your testers, and you'll figure out how Wi-Fi works real quick.
Mark, what do you have?
I'm very new, so I don't really have a lot at the house. But I can use the lab at my office where I work. So most of the time when I need to test new stuff, I can order things through or do Cisco demo loans or other vendor demo loans, and just play with it for what Blake said, for the things that I want to use at that moment. So I don't need to stop at my house yet, but. I'm for sure looking into buying stuff to play in at the house. For sure, if you're gonna prepare for vendor certification, you need to put those cases in your home lab and play with it to understand what you're doing with your lab. So I'm looking into some labs.
I don't know. Did you take the old CWAP test?
No, I did not.
Okay, just you're the first CWNE I've ever met who doesn't have a home lab. I'm like, how did you do that? Now, a question for the audience. We have at WM Pros got a collection of things. We call it the lending library, where you can check out gear, and we're actually not announcing this yet, but we'll be doing a one-way collection. It goes out, doesn't come back. We have too much. But we can't ship it to EU. So if you know of anyone who has space and would be willing to volunteer, I know where you live. You don't have that. We're talking space.
I have space.
Okay, you space, and can transship. We can get one shipment of gear over here, and then there could be an EU version of the lending library to swap out. Would anybody use that? Yeah, it's not that hard to get more donations if there was a process inside the EU to have them delivered locally where you could actually have access. So if you don't have access to enterprise gear, it's too expensive, you don't have enough parts, we're looking to expand over here as well. Okay, next question. How do you gain real world experience? Not you, you're not on the board. You're not even a CWNE, so.
Wait. He's CWNE pending because his application is in.
Oh, okay. So,
like
how do you get experience? Anyone?
Rob is correct though. It's just get out there and do it. I don't even care if it's enterprise gear. Just get out there and start doing packet captures. Grab a tool, grab Wireshark, grab whatever out there. I mean, heck, we got the NetSpot discounted or free, whatever it was I saw passed around yesterday. Just get out there and do this in your own house. I mean, yeah, your significant other might look at you like you're crazy and stupid, but they probably already know that, to be honest. They're with us anyways, and it's a surprise. Yeah, Fernie, how many times have you surveyed airports and not gotten a dime for it because you're just sitting there for 3 hours?
Or more. How long was your first Paris? Like 10 hours or something?
Yeah. How was that Times Square? Did they pay for that one?
Just get out there and do stuff. You wanna learn how airport Wi-Fi or in-plane Wi-Fi works? Do a packet capture while you're flying out there. You're not gonna get in trouble for it because it's clear text over the air.
I did it, scaring passengers.
Oh wait, we had this conversation. Didn't we?
Yeah, I was on a flight. can't remember where I was going. It was over to the Far East, and I got out spectrum capture, thought I'd have a look, and the cabin crew came over and said, "You're scaring the passengers. You've got to put that away." So yeah.
Wait, was that when you had your beard though? Just saying.
It could well have been.
That's not fair.
But this is what Blake's saying is absolutely correct, is that at the fundamental level, Wi-Fi is Wi-Fi, and that's why we have, the Wi-Fi Alliance will certify stuff, because at that Wi-Fi level, everything should work according to a standard. With vendors, a lot of what goes on is the overlay, so that's not really that relevant to the point of where Wi-Fi is delivered, if you're trying to learn the technology. So for me, it was just trying to get into situations where Wi-Fi perhaps wasn't working well, doing frame captures, looking at stuff, but also I was relentless in pursuing anybody that knew anything about Wi-Fi that I thought could be useful. I had absolutely no shame in putting my hand up and saying, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. Tapped up a lot of people like Devin, Keith as well, had emails going around, Marcus Burton, who works for the company I work with now. Send an email, say, this is what I'm looking at, I don't understand it, what's happening? And they would not give me answers. They would say, go back, look for this information, and then come back and tell me what you think. And so for me, any network that you can get your tools out and have a sniff at and share what you're looking at and share what questions you have is a fantastic way to build up experience.
I think one answer, and just, I see this too often. People go on Twitter and they tag me or Devin or Rick or Blake or someone and say, how does 802.1x work? What do you suggest? That fits in 140 characters. The answer, however, doesn't.
Well, it does now, because we have the new answer of 42.
Boom. Asterisk, even shorter. What we're after is, if you want to ask that kind of a question, say, I have a question for you, could you DM me and send an email describing what you mean, and we'll send you back an email. There are media choices that make for longer discussions. Get on the Wi-Fi Pros Slack channel. Sam Clements or Manon both can give you access. Just DM them, get an email off of them, and you can be on the Slack channel and ask bigger questions. There's nothing wrong with big questions. Now here's the trick of how you want to become part and engaged in the community. Ask a question. When you're given an answer, most likely it's going to tell you to go do some more research. Or it depends, and that's a wasteful answer. So go do the research. When you're done, write up a blog.
Yeah.
Send the blog link back to the person who answered you. They will turn around and post it to their 10,000 Twitter followers. But you have the answer that you wrote your own blog entry. That's where the knowledge is. And now you're sharing back in the community. Other people go to yours, and when you have a question, there's another place to go. Don't just take. It's not that hard to give. How many bloggers do we have in the room? Okay, while your hands are up, okay, put them down. I'll ask a different question. How many bloggers have ever Googled and got your own blog? That tells you something. Your capturing and saving in a blog is for you. Yeah, other people can get some benefit too. I don't know what the trick is, but I think my mind just says, oh, I wrote in a blog and it now can delete that. I need that space. I don't have very much up there, so it's got to go somewhere else. But the triggers of what the keywords were come back to Google. My same blog post comes back up again. Use it as a place to store information. If you're studying along the way, you can put all your study notes in there. Other people can share, and you can share them as well.
Can I add one thing on that, Keith?
Oh, of course.
On the blogging aspect of it, because he mentioned it about studying, is when you're studying for the exams, most of us either highlight or transpose into our own words into like OneNote or whatever. I've found that if you do that as a blogging activity, you've now successfully met the publishing requirements of a CWNE app way before you even had to think about that, to Martin's point about start the application early, not later. So as you're blogging, you've already started the application process because you now have plenty of blog posts to go back to look at. The other thing about it is that your interpretation might not be correct, and that's okay. Because what will happen is that if somebody else looks at it and says, hey, I thought this thing worked this way, it doesn't mean I'm going and saying, Jake, you're full of it, and whatever interpretation that you thought of was wrong. It's more of, Jake, I read your blog post. I appreciate your views on it. I thought it worked this way. And it opens up a two-way discussion in the format longer than 140 characters or whatever it's at now that we can actually use. But it opens up the door to have a communication where now you both are learning and educating yourself, and the teacher becomes the student. And we start to be able to see where we can now learn off of each other. And that's adding tons of value into all of us in the community, because then when Seb goes and Googles it now, and now you see this discussion that we're having, you're like, oh, wait, there's 2 points of view in this threaded discussion that I'm looking at, and I can now make my own interpretation and my own analysis of what their different opinions were, because we do differ on quite a bit of topics, but it provides value to everybody. So get yourself in the habit of, don't just keep that in a OneNote, put your thoughts out there. Put it out there for others to critique and be comfortable with that. That was one of my biggest things. I am a introvert that plays an extrovert on TV. For me, it's really hard to actually get up and speak and do all this stuff, but I found that once I started blogging and I accepted the criticism that folks were providing and different interpretations, it made me better because it helped me understand. Every time a student questions me in class about something, I have to go back and play back. Did I even explain it correctly or not? And Neil, you know this from being an instructor as well. Did we explain it correctly? Did we slip up somewhere? Do we even still have a grasp on what that topic was that we learned how many years ago when we were going through it? So I encourage you to switch from OneNote, switch from your internal private Evernotes, and just blog as your note engine. There's so much value in that.
I like to return to the topic of how to get experience. There are some great examples in the US, like Glenn Kate, for example, who's running a fantastic blog role on his homepage. He's doing voluntary work for churches, doing site service, installation, and whatever. Myself, I'm no longer a full-time employee. I'm running my own little consulting company. So what I've done lately is that when I attend like a one-day webinar or seminar somewhere, and I heard people having problems, I say, okay, I can I can come down to you and I can get some experience, and maybe I can help you, but I do that for free in my spare time. For example, I'm probably going to meet with a shipping line in Sweden which have problems with radars. They can't get their containers cranes to actually pick up the correct container. So I say, I can come down, no, but you are so expensive. No, I will learn and you will learn. Share.
Free's good. People like free.
Also one thing, like wireless is, if you have a wireless problem, go on site. There are so many engineers that I talk to, they get a ticket or another question, and they're like, yeah, settings are good, everything will go on site, because the users have the experience that is not good. Try to have the same experience as the users, and then you can probably find the reason why it is wrong. Channel is not correct, or utilization. Also, like I don't have a home lab, so what I did for preparing for my CWAP or CWSP, just go to my company, do some captures, check those captures. If you have an Wi-Fi like enterprise, check if all the settings are correct in the Wireshark or OmniPeak, what you use. Go on site, and there is where the problem is, and not in your home office or in your office where you try to help the customers. Customers are on site.
Yeah, free. I think most experienced people, if you're looking for a mentor, just ask them, can I come and tag along? I'll carry your bags, I'll open your doors, I'll unlock all the doors in front of you while you're surveying, and you get to spend time with whoever you want to help.
That is a huge help.
It's a huge help, and people say, yes, I'd gladly have you, and then you have lunch hours and time to see how the process works. Invest. Okay, last two questions for the group, and this is all four can answer. We're going to go through them. The first question is, 4 best practices that you always implement. Okay, we'll start on this end.
What was the question again? 4?
Top 4 best practices that you always implement. They can be do's or don'ts.
So we're talking about just general anything to do with
wireless installs.
Number 1, scale the map.
Okay, that's point 1.
Yeah, point 1. Gosh, this is such a broad thing. I would, as a best practice, I would follow a procedure. For me, one of the biggest failures when it comes to Wi-Fi installs is that the project hasn't been managed. So bad decisions are taken early on, and that affects the outcome, and then you will come in to do the installation, and those faults have been designed in. So for me, the biggest one is follow a good project management methodology. This is something I think that we've spoken about before. There are standards for project management the same way that there's standards for Wi-Fi. So the first thing is make sure you've got the requirements understood and agreed by everybody, design to those requirements, install according to that agreed design, then do your validation survey, check and tune, sign off the survey, and then make sure that you have delivered what was expected. Because otherwise you'll always be going back and it's kind of your fault because the Wi-Fi hasn't been installed correctly, but it has. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to turn your kind of obligation to go back and repair things into an ongoing maintenance issue rather than a fixed issue. So that's the second one is
Actually, you just gave all four.
Well, that's fine then, yeah.
Get requirements, design, install, validate.
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Your question, your answer was do a process. Blake?
Yeah.
Best practices.
And SCADA.
Oh, yeah.
So mine would be the first one is think for yourself. There's no absolutes in wireless. Do what's right for the design based off of the requirements. Don't be afraid to be hard and push on some of the topics. You know, do the design that's best for the wireless, and if this is where you say the access points need to go, push that. Say that this is where the APs need to go. Let them come back to you and say, no, we can't put that here, and then challenge it and say, why can't you? Figure out, is there an external antenna that we can use to skin it or do something to get it where you want it to be, because you're the expert. Don't forget that. You are the expert, so push that topic. Always learn. Always be learning on the jobs. Read the design guides, read the deployment guides, read the driver firmware release notes, read the controller release notes. Don't ever make the assumptions on something on that. And then fourth one, oh man. Well, yeah, I know, but that's already in there.
Never use the written generic AP.
Well, no, that's not even that. I was trying to think of a creative way of saying it, but I can't really think of a good way. I don't know. My stuff is really is use your own knowledge. Don't go and just look for everybody else to give you a number to design for, because it's not going to happen.
Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but don't be afraid to break the rules.
Oh God, I break the rules all the time. If you look at a lot of my installs, you would judge my book by the cover, and you would go and place my installs on Eddie's BadFi site, and I would just look at you and say, I think, Mark, I even mentioned that to you about something, right? About Omni antennas, and maybe that's how they wanted those Omnis to be when they were going the wrong angle.
I remember that.
Yeah. So just, what Keith said.
Yeah, I don't mind breaking the rules, but you better have a reason. If you broke it accidentally because you didn't know it was a rule, now that's a whole different thing. And then you post on Spiceworks or something.
That's not nice.
It's hard to be after those two. I'm agreed to the process. Like I said, I'm working with the Wireless LAN Association on the standards committee to have a process for a methodology for how to start with a design. Beside that, I think one of the things, be not afraid to make mistakes. You learn from your mistakes. Another thing is know why you check some checkbox on or off. So know what you're doing, and like learn from your mistakes and validate again and go through the process multiple times till it's work.
Okay, I'm going to concentrate on one thing, and that's a document. Write something that you can read afterwards correctly. When you're writing something that has to for someone else to read, try to figure out how you should write it so they understand what you're doing. Get the technical description correct. Use correct terms. Don't invent something which you heard about. Just actually go and check the facts before you try to write something. It could be good to have a good discussion, but don't fail on the basics. Do your little bit of research before you do it. So I think that's very important, especially if you're going to do like I'm do training, or you're going to do consulting or stuff like that. You have to look professional what you're doing.
Okay, last question. We have to end in a little controversy, of course, or for some of you, controversy.
I didn't pay attention.
Yeah, something like that. So the last question is, based on what we've heard of the conference, we've got AX is coming down the pike. We have AX with all of these features and variable power and variable RUs and OWE, yes, no, WPA3, yes, all of those issues. How is that going to change your design of your wireless LANs in the future when we have AX as a standard? Now, I know I'm getting you to predict something that doesn't even exist yet, but how are you preparing? What are you thinking about the things on how to design for AX?
Yeah, that's another great question. I didn't realize how much I didn't know about AX until I saw the presentation. It's kind of scary, but it's also an opportunity. For me, the question was, how am I going to prepare for it? I would make sure that I understood what's happening at a frame level, and that I was able to do captures and make changes and understand how those changes affect what's happening within the environment. I think the important thing is that we all need to understand Wi-Fi, how Wi-Fi works, 802.11, all of those interchanges, and how to see any configuration change or any new, what's the word I'm looking for? Anything that we want to implement with AX, that we understand how it's going to change things at the frame level, and we need to test and observe and understand any changes, how that's reflected within the environment. So I think for me it's just testing.
Okay. We'll go back and forth.
Okay, for me, when I was seeing this with AX, is because I probably not implement so many of them, but for me it was like, why didn't they do this from the beginning with small channels? Because they're jumping up on 20 megahertz channels straight away when they actually existed products running on 5 and 10 already. So now we're seeing probably the real benefits of how much capacity do you really need for your application. That's the main goal for our clients, basically.
AX is dead, right? No, without kidding, I do think we need to keep in mind, like, what does the customer want? If the customer have a requirement where AX is not needed yet, don't push it that directly to, like, you need to go to Wi-Fi 6 because
Perry's going to get mad at you if you say that.
Oh yeah, but we will talk later. Like Wi-Fi 6, all customers probably want to know, like, we want Wi-Fi 6 because Wi-Fi 6 is better than Wi-Fi 5. And we need to help the customers to explain what Wi-Fi 6 is and what is not. And maybe they don't need those expensive endpoints right now. So keep your, use Jake's brain.
Blake?
What's 802.11ax? Is that like a body spray or a nice clothing line? No, I think for me personally, I don't necessarily foresee it changing too much of my design thought process and methodology. I think it might actually allow us to go against something that we say in all the ECSEs, is that we do physical requirements first, and then that dictates what our capacity is. We might just actually, for once, maybe be able to look at it and say, oh, you want so much capacity? Cool, I can now do that for you. I can design for capacity first. So I don't necessarily foresee it changing how I design and how I go through. I just think that it might change my thought processes around how I relate that to what capacity I can provide it. But I'm very much in agreement with Martin, is that we might actually finally realize that you don't need 80 megahertz wide channel widths on 5 gigahertz to be able to stream Netflix 4K because it's coming off of a content delivery network and your buffer is built up for 15 minutes already. We don't need to do that. We can do that on 20 megahertz. So I think it just might change capacity outlooks a little bit.
Good. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you to the CWNEs who have volunteered their time. Go ahead and clap.